Welcome, my name is Philip King. Before we begin, I would like to ask a favor from you. If you like our videos, then please click on the like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel to show your support. Okay, let us begin. Today we will be talking about enforcing the WordPress PHP coding standards when writing WordPress themes and plugins. You can find the documentation using this URL. Today I will be reading from the WordPress Core Handbook, Best Practices Coding Standards. Why? Because I hate reading technical documents online. I would much rather listen to an audiobook, hence this presentation. If you would prefer to read the documentation yourself, be my guest, I will not be offended. The purpose of the various WordPress coding standards is to create a baseline for collaboration and review within the WordPress open source project and community. These standards are part of the recommended best practices that developers and core contributors should follow. Why have coding standards? Coding standards help avoid common coding errors, improve the readability of code, and simplify modification. They ensure that files within the project appear as if they were created by a single person. If you are planning to contribute to WordPress Core, you need to familiarize yourself with these standards, as any code you submit will need to comply with them. For those who are wondering why you should consider following the WordPress PHP coding standards, here are some pretty good reasons to do so. Everyone, left to their own devices, would have similar but not necessarily consistent coding methods with no standards in place. Without a standard to follow, the language, code style and syntax used by programmers would vary. The huge variety of coding options available leads to wildly different code bases. Having no coding standard inevitably leads to inefficiency, low maintainability and poor stability. WordPress has potentially many thousands of programmers and designers working on the core code, themes, and plugins at any one time. With no best practices in place, the different coding styles would simply make WordPress unsustainable. Hence the need for the WordPress PHP coding standards. Before we begin the WordPress PHP coding standards, please note that some parts of the WordPress code structure for PHP markup are inconsistent in their style. WordPress is working to improve this situation and help users maintain a consistent style. The aim being to create code that is clean and easy to read at a glance. You should also familiarize yourself with the WordPress PHP documentation standards. Also, note that if you are planning to contribute to WordPress, whether for core programming code, plugins, or themes, any code you submit will need to comply with these standards. Are you sitting comfortably? Then let us begin. Single and double quotes. Use single and double quotes when appropriate. If you are not evaluating anything in the string, use single quotes. You should almost never have to escape quotes in a string, because you can just alternate your quoting style. Run text that goes into attributes through the escape attribute function. This prevents single or double quotes ending the attribute value and invalidating the HTML and causing a security issue. See data validation in the codex for further details. Indentation. Your indentation should always reflect logical structure. Use real tabs and not spaces, as this allows the most flexibility across clients. The exception to this is if you have a block of code that would be more readable if things are aligned, then it is permissible to use spaces. For associative arrays, each item should start on a new line when the array contains more than one item. Note the comma after the last array item. This is recommended because it makes it easier to change the order of the array. It also makes for cleaner diffs when new items are added. For switch structures, case should indent one tab from the switch statement, and break one tab from the case statement. As a general rule of thumb, tabs should be used at the beginning of the line for indentation, while spaces can be used mid-line for alignment. Brace style. Braces shall be used for all blocks in the style shown here. If you have a really long block, consider whether it can be broken into 2 or more shorter blocks, functions, or methods, to reduce complexity, improve ease of testing, and increase readability. Braces should always be used, even when they are not required. Note that requiring the use of braces just means that single-statement inline control structures are prohibited. You are free to use the alternative syntax for control structures. For example in, if, and if, and, while structures. This is especially pertinent in your templates where PHP code is embedded within HTML. Use else if, not else space if. Else space if is not compatible with the colon syntax for if, else if blocks. For this reason, use else if for conditionals. Multi-line function calls. When splitting a function call over multiple lines, each parameter must be on a separate line. Single-line inline comments can take up their own line. Each parameter must take up no more than a single line. Multi-line parameter values must be assigned to a variable and then that variable should be passed to the function call. Regular expressions. Perl-compatible regular expressions should be used in preference to their POSIX counterparts. Never use the /e switch, use preg replace callback instead. It is most convenient to use single quoted strings for regular expressions since, contrary to double quoted strings, they have only 2 meta sequences, / and double /. Opening and closing PHP tags. When embedding multi-line PHP snippets within a HTML block, the PHP open and close tags must be on a line by themselves. Shown here is the correct multi-line and single-line methods. No shorthand PHP tags. Important, never use shorthand PHP start tags. Always use full PHP tags. Remove trailing spaces. Remove trailing white space at the end of each line of code. Omitting the closing PHP tag at the end of a file is preferred. If you use the tag, make sure you remove trailing white space. Space usage. Always put spaces after commas, and on both sides of logical, comparison, string and assignment operators. Put spaces on both sides of the opening and closing parentheses of if, else if, for each, for, and switch blocks. When defining a function, do it like so. When calling a function, do it like so. When performing logical comparisons, do it like so. Typecasts must be lowercase. Always prefer the short form of typecasts, int, instead of integer, and bool, rather than boolean. For floatcasts use float. When referring to array items, only include a space around the index if it is a variable, as shown in this example. In a switch block, there must be no space before the colon for a case statement. Similarly, there should be no space before the colon on return type declarations. Unless otherwise specified, parentheses should have spaces inside of them. Formatting SQL statements. When formatting SQL statements, you may break the statements into several lines and indent, if it is sufficiently complex to warrant it. Most SQL statements work well as one line. Always capitalize the SQL parts of the statement like update or where. Functions that update the database should expect their parameters to lack SQL/escaping when passed. Escaping should be done as close to the time of the query as possible, preferably by using the wpdb-prepare function. The wpdb-prepare function is a method that handles escaping, quoting, and intcasting for SQL queries. It uses a subset of the sprint function style of formatting as shown in this example. %s is used for string placeholders and %d is used for integer placeholders. Note that they are not quoted. The wpdb-prepare function will take care of escaping and quoting for us. The benefit of this is that we don't have to remember to manually use the esc_SQL function, and also that it is easy to see at a glance whether something has been escaped or not, because it happens right when the query happens. See data validation in the codex for more information. Database queries. Avoid touching the database directly. If there is a defined function that can get the data you need, use it. Database abstraction, using functions instead of queries, helps keep your code forward compatible and, in cases where results are cached in memory, it can be many times faster. If you must touch the database, get in touch with some developers by posting a message to the WP Hackers mailing list. They may want to consider creating a function for the next WordPress version to cover the functionality you wanted. Naming conventions. Use lowercase letters in variable, action, filter, and function names. Never use camel case. Separate words using underscores. Do not abbreviate variable names unnecessarily, let the code be unambiguous and self-documenting. Class names should use capitalized words separated by underscores. Any acronyms should be all uppercase. Constants should be in all uppercase, with underscores separating words. Files should be named descriptively using lowercase letters. Hyphens should separate words. Class file names should be based on the class name. Prepend the file name with class dash. And replace the class name underscores with hyphens, for example, wp underscore error becomes, class dash. wp dash. Error. This file naming standard is for all current and new files with classes. There is one exception for 3 files that contain code that got ported into backpress, namely, class.wordpress-dependencies.php, class.wordpress-scripts.php, and class.wp-styles.php. Those 3 files are prepended with class. Instead of class dash. Files containing template tags in WP-includes should have dash template appended to the end of the name to indicate that they are obviously template files. Self-explanatory flag values for function arguments. Prefer string values to just true and false when calling functions. Since PHP does not support named arguments, the values of the flags are meaningless, and each time we come across a function call like this, we have to search for the function definition. The code can be made more readable by using descriptive string values, instead of booleans. When more words are needed to describe the function parameters, an args array may be a better pattern. Interpolation for naming dynamic hooks. Dynamic hooks should be named using interpolation, rather than concatenation for readability and discoverability purposes. Dynamic hooks are hooks that include dynamic values in their tag name. Variables used in hook tags should be wrapped in curly braces, with the complete outer tag name wrapped in double quotes. This is to ensure PHP can correctly parse the given variables types within the interpolated string. Where possible, dynamic values in tag names should also be as succinct and to the point as possible. User_ID is much more self-documenting than, for example, this arrow ID. Ternary operator. Ternary operators are fine, but always have them test if the statement is true, not false. Otherwise, it just gets confusing. An exception would be using not empty, as testing for false here is generally more intuitive. Iota conditions. When doing logical comparisons involving variables, always put the variable on the right side and put constants, literals, or function calls on the left side. If neither side is a variable, the order is not important. In computer science terms, in comparisons always try to put L values on the right and R values on the left. In this example, if you omit an equals sign, you will get a parse error, because you can't assign to a constant like true. If the statement were the other way around, $the_force equals true, the assignment would be perfectly valid, returning 1, causing the if statement to evaluate to true. You could be chasing that bug for a while. A little bizarre, it is, to read. Get used to it, you will. This suggestion applies to equal, not equal, identical, and not identical comparisons. iota comparisons for less than, greater than, less than, or equal to, and greater than or equal to, are significantly more difficult to read and are best avoided. Clever code. In general, readability is more important than cleverness or brevity. Although this line of code is clever, it takes a while to understand if you are not familiar with it. Instead, do not try to be clever, just write it simply. Unless absolutely necessary, loose comparisons should not be used, as their behavior can be misleading. Assignments must not be placed in conditionals. In a switch statement, it is okay to have multiple empty cases fall through to a common block. However, if a case contains a block, then falls through to the next block, this must be explicitly commented. The goto statement must never be used. The eval function construct is very dangerous, and is impossible to secure. Additionally, the create_ function, which internally performs an eval function call, is deprecated in PHP 7.2. Both of these functions must not be used. Error control operator. As noted in the PHP docs, PHP supports one error control operator, the @. When prepended to an expression in PHP, any error messages that might be generated by that expression will be ignored. While this operator does exist in core, it is often used lazily, instead of doing proper error checking. Its use is highly discouraged, as even the PHP docs also state. Warning: currently the @error control operator prefix will even disable error reporting for critical errors that will terminate script execution. Among other things, this means that if you use @ to suppress errors from a certain function and either it is not available or has been mistyped, the script will die right there with no indication as to why. Don't extract. Extract is a terrible function that makes code harder to debug and harder to understand. We should discourage its use and remove all of our uses of it. Joseph Scott has a good write-up of why it's bad. I hope you liked this video and found it helpful. If you did, then please click on the like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel to show your support. You should also check out the King Solutions website, the links are below the video. See you soon, and thanks again for taking the time to view this video.